interactables. So this is going to be summing up our interaction system with our interactable game objects. We should be very happy because our producer loves us. We are doing a very good job. So she comes in and says, fantastic, I'd like you to create an interactable system to process the player input and tie conditions and reactions together. I love those conditions and reactions. We want to tie them together. So when an interactable is clicked on, the player must move to a specific location in the scene marked by a transform reference called interaction location. Upon reaching the interaction location, the player must call a public interact function that will in turn call an appropriate reaction collection based on the conditions and the game state. And please create a custom inspector for the interactable to make it more easy to understand, because this is what it looks like now, and it's rather confusing. So our approach, the interactable will have an event trigger component that registers clicks and a box collider to define the volume in the game to interact with. When clicked, the interactable sets the current destination for the player, and when the player arrives, the interact function will be called by the player movement script. We'll create a custom inspector for the interactable component, so it'll look like this, look a little nicer than the default inspector. So let's look at the steps. Navigate to the scenes folder, and let's open the security room scene. So we have that loaded. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the event system, which James might be so happy to recap.
OK, so this is exactly the same as we talked about before. We need three things for our event system to work. We need something to send them, something to receive them, and something to manage them. Again, we're using the same thing that we did in the player phase. So that's a physics raycaster component attached to the camera. That's going to be raycasting into the scene. We're going to have colliders and event triggers to receive those events, and then an event system game object to manage them.
And to recap the structure of interactables, we have that interactable which contains several or a series of condition collections. Each condition collection has a collection of conditions. All of them have an associated reaction collection, and then the interactable has its default reaction collection at the bottom, which if none of the conditions are met, or if there are no conditions, we play the default reaction. As an example, our guard interactable, the first collection has glasses and coffee, so that'll have an immediate condition of has glasses and a condition of has coffee. If those are both correct, then we play the glasses and coffee reaction, which is an audio reaction, a text reaction, a condition reaction, etc. Glasses only, we play the glasses reaction. If none of those are correct, we fall through to the default reaction. So the interactable script. So we're going to write this script that is the interactable, that controls the interactable. So we're going to navigate to our script's monobehavior interactions folder, select that, create a new C# script. We're going to name it interactable, and then let's open it for editing. So seeing that live, we are going to go to our scripts folder. We're going to go to our monobehavior folder. We are going to go to our interaction folder, and then we can create a C# script. And that C# script will be called interactable. And with that created, let's open that up for editing.
Standard start, remove gubbins. Next, this is a monobehavior. We want it to sit on a game object. And the fields within this class should be relatively familiar to you now. We know we've got a transform, which is the interaction location, and we know we need an array of condition collections. We also need a default reaction collection should none of those condition collections get fired. So let's start off by making those. First off, we've got a public transform called interaction location. Next, we've got a public array of condition collections, so condition collection array called condition collections. And like we have done before, we're going to give that a default value so that when we're looking at it in our editor, we can assume that it's not null. So we're going to set that to a new condition collection array of size 0. Okay, and the last field that we need is our public reaction collection. And we're going to call that default reaction collection. Next, we've only got one function that we need to write in this class, and that is the interact function. That's the function that the player is going to call as he or she arrives. Sorry. So that's public void interact. And all we need to do here is loop through all of the condition collections until one reacts, and if none of them react, then we'll react with the default reaction. So let's create our for loop, and we're looping between 0 and condition collections.length. And for each one, we want to check the condition collection and react. So we do that with the condition collections check and react function. And since that returns a bool, we can put this within an if statement. So we're going to say if condition collections, I dot check and react. So if that returns true, then we don't want to do anything else because we've already reacted to this interaction. So we'll just return out of the function. Should it not be true, it'll continue on to the next iteration of the loop, and the next, until it finds one that it does react to. If it doesn't react to any of them, then we're going to fall through to our default reaction. So at the bottom of the function, default reaction collection dot react. And that is the end of the script. So at this point, I'd really like to reiterate that we're doing all of this difficult editor scripting so that all of our runtime code is really small, really neat, and really easy to handle. So save your script and return to the editor.
All right. So next we need to do some work on the player movement script. So we want to expand the script's monobehaviors folder and look in the player folder and open the player movement script for editing. So this time for real, we're going to open the monobehaviors player folder and open the player movement script for editing.
So we already wrote this at the start of the day. We're not going to do anything more to it. We're just going to uncomment the code that depended on the interactable which we just wrote. So that's at line 17, you've got a commented out interactable. And then further down in the stopping function, there is a block comment stopping you from having that if statement. So get rid of that. Then further down still in the on-ground click function, line 120. And then finally, the on-interactable click function. That's commented out too.
That's around line 135.
Save the script and return to the editor. We don't need to cover that. We've already done it.
Before we move on, we just want to briefly chat about and remind ourselves about the editor with sub-editor class.
OK, so we've already looked at this. We're not going to look at it again, but I want to remind you about how it works. So this is a replacement for a normal editor. Instead of inheriting from editor, we inherit from editor with sub-editors. And that makes some assumptions about what we want to do. It assumes that we've got an array within our target that we want to have sub-editors for. So in this example, we're going to create an editor for the interactable. And that has an array of condition collections. Each condition collection has an editor that we want to have an array of. Because we have an interactable with condition collection array. We need an interactable editor with condition collection editor arrays.
Looking at that graphically?
So this is just the same as we saw previously. We have our interactable, and our interactable editor is targeting it. So the serialized object represents the interactable. And that has a bunch of sub-editors which represent the condition collection. Then each condition collection has a condition collection editor. Those have their serialized object representing a condition collection. They also have an array of sub-editors, this time representing conditions.
So the interactable editor script, we're going to go ahead and open this up and do some editing to it. Again, into our scripts folder, opening our editor folder, and going to interaction, and then opening the interactable editor.
So you'll notice a great swath of code there that is commented out, and that's because we really like you and we didn't want you to have to write all that serialized property stuff again. So we've written it for you, and you just need to uncomment it. But there is more stuff that you have to write, so we don't like you that much.
Yes. We've seen this before. We've done it at least twice with all of that string, interactable, prop, whatever.
So the first thing to notice at the top is that we are inheriting, indeed, from editor with sub-editors. Now, we've given it two generic types, and those are the type of the sub-editors that we want to create and the things that those sub-editors will be targeting. So we have arrays of condition collections in interactables. They need condition collection editors. What do we need to do now? Well, we need to target a specific class. So at the top of the script, just before the class definition, we need to give it the custom editor attribute. And that is going to have a type of interactable. We're going to need to reference the target here. So the target is going to be an interactable. So we will need to create a reference to that. So with our private variables, create a private interactable, which we will call interactable. Then we're going to add to the onEnable function. So we need to cache that reference to the target. So after all of your serialized property stuff, we're going to say interactable equals, and then we're going to cast the target to an interactable. So open brackets, capital I for interactable because it's the type, close parentheses, and then we're casting the target. Now that we have the interactable, we have a reference to that, we can call check and create sub-editors. And we need to pass it the array that we're creating editors for. So that is interactable.conditionCollections. OK, since we're creating editors, we need to be able to destroy them. So after onEnable, we're going to put a call to onDisable. So that's private void onDisable. And we're going to call cleanup editors. OK, so the next function we've got here is sub-editor setup. So the sub-editor setup is supposed to allow you to change things about editors that have just been created, and it passes the editor that you've just created as a parameter. So in this case, we've got a condition collection editor. And what we need to do there is give it the collections property that it belongs to, so that we can click that button and it will remove itself from the collection. So we'll say editor.collectionsProperty equals collections property. So the first collections property there, that belongs to the sub-editor. The second collections property belongs to this editor, because we've just found a reference to it with all of our serialized properties. OK, so the last function we need to write is onInspectorGUI, because we need to actually display this to screen. So create a public override void. called onInspector GUI. Now, first thing, what do we need to call? We need to update the serialized object. Whenever you're doing an editor, make sure that you're updating the serialized object at the start, and we're applying the modified properties at the bottom. So serialized object dot update, and then at the end, serialized object dot apply modified properties. And then we're going to put all of the rest of the code in between those two lines of code. So again, just like we've done before, we're going to check and create sub-editors here, because within each frame, we might change how many editors we need. So if that's the case, we want to be able to update that. And remember, when we're checking that, we need to check it based on an array, so we know we have the right editors. So that array, in this case, is interactable.condition collections. What's the first thing we want to display for our interactable editor? Well, the first thing that we have is the interaction location. And we don't need to do anything fancy with that. So all we're going to do is just draw a normal property field for it. So editor GUI layout dot property field, and then we're going to give it the interaction location property. Now, after that, the next field is all of the condition collections, so the array of condition collections. But we're not going to handle that here. They have their own editors. Those are going to do all of that. All we need to do is tell them to display themselves. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a for loop, and we're looping between 0 and subeditors.length. So that's going to loop through all of the condition collection editors. And then for each one, we're going to say subeditors I dot onInspector GUI. So remember, those sub-editors, they aren't part of the inspector like a regular inspector is. They need to have their onInspector GUI function called manually. Now, between each of those condition collections, we want to space them out a little bit. So we're just going to add editor GUI layout dot space. We've displayed the interaction location. We've displayed all of the condition collections. What we need now is actually a button to add to that. We need to be able to add condition collections. And just to make it look a little bit neater, we're going to make it right aligned. So how do we do that? Well, we need to create a horizontal layout group. So editor GUI layout dot begin horizontal. And remember, whenever we start a layout group, we need to end it. So we're going to say editor GUI layout dot end horizontal, and then we'll work within that. Now, how do we make something right aligned? Well, what we actually need to do is create something that takes up space to its left, so that it's forced to the right. And the way to do that is with flexible space. So we're going to say GUI layout dot flexible space. You could just as easily do this with, for example, an empty label field, but that's not very tidy. This is the way we're supposed to do it. Then, to the right of that flexible space, we're going to create a button. So buttons are always within if statements. So we'll say if GUI layout dot button, and then the label that we're going to give the button is add collection as a string. And we're going to give it a specific width, and that is done with GUI layout.width. And we've already got a constant for that, so that's collection button width. So when this button is clicked, what do we want to do? Well, we want to create a new condition collection. So the next line is condition collection, new collection, and we're setting that equal to condition collection editor dot create condition collection. So now that we've created it, we need to add that to our collections array. So we're going to say, after that, collections property dot add to object array. Now this is another one of those extension methods. If you want to see the details on how this one works, you can have a look at the serialized property extensions. But for now, we're just going to pass it the new collection that we just made. So new collection. OK, so we've displayed the interaction location. We've displayed each of the condition collections. We've made a button for adding new condition collections. What do we need that's left? Well, we need to have a reference to that reaction collection. After the horizontal layout group, because we're not going to put it in the same line as this, we want it afterwards at the bottom, we're going to add a little bit of space, so editor GUI layout dot space. And then finally, editor GUI layout dot property field, because we don't need anything special for this. It's just going to be an object reference that we drag on. And the property that we're passing it is default reaction collection property. OK, and that's it. Save your script and return to Unity.
Let's now make our interactable prefab. If it's not already open, navigate to the Scenes folder and open the Security Room scene. If it is open, then yay, you're there. So we're going to create our interactable prefab. So let's make sure we're looking at the scene, and let's navigate to the hierarchy, and let's create a new empty game object. And let's name that game object interactable. So that's our interactable game object. Now, on that interactable game object, let's add a box collider, and we don't want the 2D one, just a normal box collider. And then let's add an event trigger. And then on that event trigger, let's add a new pointer, a new event type. And that new event type is going to be pointer click. So we now have our event trigger with a pointer click type. The list is empty, so let's add a new event to that event list. And now we want to add an interactable component. So again, add component. And then we're looking for interactable. And then we can add that on. And we can see that we have our interactable component with our new custom editor. And so on the interactable, we want to create two new children. We want to create an empty child. And we want to create, we can just duplicate that one for the second one. So we have two. So we have our interactable and we have our two children. First child, let's name that interaction location. And the other one is default reaction. So those are our two associated game objects to our interactable. That's the interactable location, which we're just going to use the transform, and our default reaction. Now let's select that default reaction. And let's add a reaction collection. So that's our reaction collection with that custom editor that we're used to seeing. So now let's select the interactable game object, and let's assign the interaction location, and let's assign the default reaction. So the interaction location, so that's grabbing the game object, dragging it into interaction location, and then default reaction going to the default reaction. So this is the base setup for our interactable prefab. So let's go ahead and drag that down, the interactable game object here, out of the hierarchy, and let's drag it into our prefabs folder. And if we drop it, that we now have our interactable prefab, which we can then use to make any interactable that we want to in our game. Now that we have our interactable prefab, let's go ahead and make or picture interactable. So let's make one in the scene. So we're going to just modify the instance that we turned into the prefab. So again, we're looking at our interactable game object. Let's go ahead and change the name on that one to picture interactable. So let's just add picture to the front. So that's our picture interactable. And we eventually want it to come around to where our picture is on the wall with our employee of the month, Mr. Frank Jobsworth over there. I'm going to go up to the gizmos here just because I find the light probes are a little bit in my way. And I'm going to take the light probe group and I'm going to turn off the gizmos. So I've taken the light probe group, selected to turn off gizmos. That's just for me. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. And then let's just sort of frame selected in on that, that interactable game object. So what do we want to do? We want to set the location or the position of that interactable game object. So we want to set that on the picture interactable. And what we want to do is set the position to 3.18. What we're going to do is move the interactable game object over to the picture, and then 0.24 in the Z. So X 3.18, Y of 0, Z of 0.24. I'm going to back out, and we can see now that we've just essentially moved that over, and that game object now is right there underneath the picture. And so what we're going to do here is we've moved the game object to the approximate location of the picture. And we could jockey the game object around, but it's also just as easy to change the box collider's position and size itself. So let's come back to the box collider, and let's change the box collider's size and center. So let's set the center up on the Y to 2.5. So that again is the box collider component on the picture interactable. And we can see now that that box is up there along with the center of the picture. And then let's set the size of the box collider to 0.25, so it's going to be thin along the X. It's going to be 2.3, a little tall, and then 3.8, it's going to be, not 38, 3.8 is good enough. It's going to be wide. So now coming back, sorry I couldn't show you it all, but the zoom is a bit difficult. We can see that we now have that interactable right up there with that photograph or that picture hologram. So that's going to be the interactable volume in our scene, is clicking on the picture. So returning to the picture interactable, we need to set the event trigger. So let's drag the player into the event trigger because it's the on-interactable click that's going to be on our player game object. And this is the instance, it's the player that's in the scene. And we want to take the function off of the player movement and not on ground click, but we want on interactable click. And then we want to take the interactable, and the interactable we're going to pass is the picture itself. So simply drag the component into the parameter slot. Now, the last thing we need to do is set the position of the interaction location. So our picture interactable, yeah, that's where I want it to be. And the interaction location is still down there underneath the picture. And so if we just use that interaction location, the player is going to try to walk right up to the wall, stick her nose right in the middle of that hologram. Not very fashionable. So let's go ahead and drag that, that transform location of the picture interactable back a little bit. So on the x-axis, let's say minus 1.5, and we can see that it's now moved into a nice viewing position right in front. However, its rotation is incorrect. So let's rotate it 90 degrees on the Y. And we can see that the blue arrow is now facing towards the painting. So that our character, Yasmin, is going to try to come to this point, and she's going to be looking down along that blue line axis towards the painting. Now let's look at the default reaction. So that's the default reaction child game object of the picture interactable. And let's add a text reaction and an audio reaction, because you know that when she walks up to it, we want to see, we want to have her hear her reaction, saying, "Oh, he looks pretty trustworthy in whatever language it is that she's speaking, and then also see that text reaction. So we need to create a text reaction, and we need to create an audio reaction. In the text reaction, we can go ahead and expand that. We've seen this before. Let's put in, he looks pretty trustworthy. And then on the audio reaction, we want to set an audio source and an audio clip. So using the circle select, the audio source wants to be VO. So that's the VO. And then the audio clip, again using circle select, let's limit it by just, we can write in trustworthy. Player, this guy looks pretty trustworthy. And so now we've set our audio source and our audio clip. We don't need any delay. So let's go ahead and save our scene. And we need to open the persistent scene. So let's go ahead and close these down and open our persistent scene. And then we can test by entering play mode. So our Yasmin needs to walk out into the room just so we can see her. And then we can look at the picture interactable.
I saw it again.
And we get our text reaction and we get our audio reaction.